There's no denying the tension between police and the community in many parts of our country. We've seen the protests in Ferguson and now the upcoming trials of 6 police officers charged with the death of Freddie Gray in Baltimore. These incidents, of course, have been in the national spotlight. Here in California, there is a bill on the table aimed at tackling racial profiling. Assemblymember Shirley Weber introduced the bill. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Now, you know, Chief Shelley Zimmerman has said in a PSA the department, quote, does not and will not tolerate any racial profiling. What do you see here in San Diego?
Well, I think it's important that the police chief says that. It's important. It's a statewide law against racial profiling. Obviously, we see it in the data that comes out that there's still racial profiling that does exist. So the question is not, if you say you're not going to tolerate, then the question becomes, what are you going to do about it?
Okay, which leads to our next question here. AB 953, let's talk about that. Basically, what would it require?
AB 953 has a couple of points to it. One, it requires that every stop that's not related to an emergency or helping someone on the side of the road, but every stop then has to be recorded by the police officer to determine what the ethnic background was of the individual, if they can identify it, and then of course the information as to what happened as a result of it, because oftentimes it's that stop that starts the confrontation that basically escalates into something else because it was either an unnecessary stop or one that had no basis for being a person being stopped. And so as a result, we want to find out, are people being stopped more, which we know the data says it does. So it collects the data. Then it takes that data and sends it to the Department of Justice and the Attorney General here in the state, who then takes the data and looks at it, analyzes it, and puts out a report. But in addition to that, there's also an advisory committee that's made up of police officers, it's made up of university professors, it's made up of community activists, who then also look at the data and basically hold hearings around it and make recommendations for change in the state.
Now, what was your initial motivation for introducing this bill?
Well, my initial motivation came from the fact, obviously, of all the stuff that's happening. You know, racial profiling is old. It is not new. It is very old. And when I served on the NAACP, we had an agreement at that point with the city that we collect data, which we did. We collected for a while, but then it stopped. Like most places, they'll collect it for a while, they'll keep it in a box, they don't make it public, and when the pressure goes down, people forget about it because there is no statewide mandate for turning the information over or making it public. So my motivation came from the fact that here we were many years later without an actual policy concerning racial profiling, without any process for collecting the data and really making the data public, and without any recommendations as to how do we get beyond this. I've seen these situations now escalate unnecessarily throughout the nation, and California is in a unique position that it can do something about it. We also discovered that Connecticut has been doing this and has been doing an excellent job, and they've seen the decline in the incidents that have happened. They've seen the public having more a sense of engagement and confidence in the police in Connecticut. And so we looked at that model and took that model and adjusted it for California.
Now, earlier this year, a report from the San Diego Police Department showed about 11% of those stopped in traffic stops were black drivers, but then they only made up about 5.8% of the population. As far as the data here, 30% stopped were Hispanic, but about 26.6% of the population. Now, San Diego Police said it was hard to draw conclusions from that because there's no way to figure out San Diego's driving population. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's interesting. They can't determine our driving population, but they do. They collect data. And they see the data, and so therefore, rather than dealing with the fact that African Americans in most cities are 2 and 3 times more likely to be stopped, they also should have included the data how many times did that indicate that end up in someone being arrested or charged with something. As a very low rate of charging, where the population, if the number of whites that are stopped have a higher percentage, end up being basically prosecuted because they're being stopped because for a specific reason. Where when you're dealing with African Americans and others, there's no specific reason as to why they're being stopped. They're just being stopped. I mean, we saw that recently in New York with the tennis player who was taken, thrown on the ground, had done nothing, talking on his cell phone. That's racial profiling. You come up on this person, you do this because he looks like a criminal, even though you don't know who he is, you don't ask him a question, and you just attack him. So, I mean, those kinds of things are unacceptable.
And I did contact the San Diego Police Officers Association for a comment. They didn't want to say anything on camera, but instead they gave me a report. The report was from the California Police Chiefs Association. So in it, it says the bill is just too costly, and it also says it doesn't take into account other things. For instance, if a person being stopped was under a court order, or if there was a warrant for arrest. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, First of all, if there's a reason for stopping them, that would end up in the report. If they were stopped because they were told to stop a car that had a certain license plate and a certain color, and they had a picture of the person, then that says, yes, that ended up in an arrest. But if you're just stopping people because you think they might be a criminal, then that is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. They're going to say, you know, we didn't take into a lot of things in consideration, but we did. We took it all into consideration. That's why the bill went through several committees, was narrowed down, basically, and focuses upon very specific things in terms of what we're trying to collect. So that's important. The issue of cost, we spend probably more dealing with lawsuits and wrongful deaths and those kinds of things than we'd ever spend in the collection of data. We do collect data, and so therefore the overestimate of how much it's going to cost is really blown out of proportion. But keep in mind, this bill went through 2 appropriations committees, the Assembly and the Senate. And so when you go through appropriations, the assumption is, 1, it's not a costly bill, and 2, if it becomes a cost factor, then we will come back the next year and fund it.
So do you believe those numbers in that report are accurate? I saw anywhere between a few thousand to I think up to $250,000 that this could cost a police department.
Well, you know, oftentimes when you don't want to do something, I found being in the Assembly, you always estimate much more. You know, I once had a bill that simply wanted the parole officers that on your exit from parole and probation, that you tell a person you have the right to vote, and here's a card, so if you want to register to vote, you can. That came to millions and millions of dollars of people simply saying, you now have the right to vote, and here's a card from the registrar of voters. And that became, because people didn't want to do it. Now, you and I sitting here know that that is not a costly activity, okay, to basically make that statement. But people estimated that it would cost millions of dollars. So instead, they put it on the website to inform people that they have the right to vote. But when you don't want to do something, it's always expensive. When you want to do something, it is not expensive at all because you can find a way to accomplish it.
So where does the bill go from here?
The bill right now sits on the governor's desk. It sits on his desk. It has gone through several committees in the Assembly, appropriations. It's passed the floor of the Assembly. It's gone through several committees in the Senate, and the Senate appropriations. It's passed the Senate floor. It came back into the Assembly for reconcurrence last week. So it's passed all these committees. It has passed muster with everyone. Now the question is, it sits on the governor's desk. And the governor has the opportunity to basically sign the bill and put California in a place where it can finally deal with the issue of racial profiling in a direct way rather than an anecdotal way, but deal with the data, the information, and begin to correct this problem.
And so we're looking at early October is
October 11th
deadline.
is the deadline for him to sign. It would be great if he signed it tomorrow. He's already signed some bills, so if we can encourage him to sign it as soon as possible, it will keep people from lobbying him so hard.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Of course, we'll wait and see. We appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great. And we'll be back next week here with the critical issues that matter to you. I'm Melissa Masiha, 10 News.